Okay. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Ivy tuku ingoa, no ha mō o kutikuna. Kei te noho au ki tamaki makaurau. Kia anō e tātou, manawa mai te Māori nuku, manawa mai te Māori rangi, ko te Māori ki au, he Māori te pua, ka pakauru mai te pō. Tau mai te Māori, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora and hello. Welcome to the Agricultural Investment webinar. My name is Ivy from the Pacific Island Trade Invest team here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Today I've opened us off with a karakia in te reo, which is a prayer, as we all do around the Blue Pacific. It's great to see everyone online and we can't wait to get started. So without further ado, let's cross over to Pacific Island Farm Secretariat's Director of Programs Initiatives, Mr. Zarat Khan.
Thank you very much, Ivy. I hope everyone can hear me well. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon on this second investment webinar that's been organized by PT9 New Zealand, with particular focus on agriculture, which is a priority sector for Forum Island countries. I recognize that there are over 100 persons who have registered for this webinar, including Mr. Ritesh Das, the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Agriculture for the Government of Fiji, whom I would like to pay attention to by thanking him for agreeing to be part of this webinar and to share the Fiji government's policies to support foreign direct investment in this key sector of all our Pacific economies. I would also like to recognize Mr. George Kuru, the Director of Atamari, and Mr. Fitrian Ardiansia, the Global Envoy for Nature-Based Solutions and Country Director for Indonesia and Malaysia for IDH. On behalf of the Secretary General, it is a great pleasure to be here today to introduce this webinar on learning how to optimize smallholder farming operations through aggregation, technology, and experience, which I believe will provide great value for the agricultural sector across the Blue Pacific. The Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat is proud to be supporting the efforts of PT9 New Zealand's Trade Commissioner, Ms. Glenys Miller, and her team to bring new sources of private sector capital to the Blue Pacific to help provide an array of solutions for a strong post-COVID-19 recovery. PT9 New Zealand understands that donor and government funding have played an important role in the region's COVID-19 recovery efforts, but private sector capital is also needed to rebuild and grow, and to complement traditional funding measures to ensure a strong and robust future for all. Agriculture is a key sector for a strong COVID recovery, and with most of the agriculture sector made up of smallholder farms, today's webinar is designed to provide some good news to all in this sector. IDH are the world's largest smallholder farm fund and services provider, and are now looking to bring their years of experience and established business models to the Blue Pacific. We are looking forward to learning from IDH today as they share their global experiences developed over many years as an actual investor. We will work with PT9 New Zealand to help them engage and deliver positive outcomes for our Pacific businesses and producers in the agricultural sector. I'd like to acknowledge the collaboration and support shown by Atamari, who imparted valuable information through an earlier webinar held in May this year on how to attract private sector investment in the agricultural sector in Pacific Island countries. With this, I would like to acknowledge and welcome our speakers today, including Mr. Ritesh Das, the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Agriculture in Fiji, and we welcome his words and support for this webinar. I thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start the presentation if we can get the screen share, please. Thank you. If you could please confirm you're able to view the screen.
Yes, PS.
Right. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to provide you an overview of the agriculture sector in Fiji. I'll try to wrap it up, in the time slot that's available, and we'll be happy to take any further questions and comments and even queries through our normal communication channels. So as you can see, 5 priority areas for the ministry: food and nutrition security for all Fijians and agriculture driving the economic growth are obviously the main priorities for Fiji. Effective execution of these programs underpinned by superior service delivery is the motto, is the objective of the Ministry of Agriculture, and a lot has been achieved over the last couple of years, as will be shown in the next few slides. So most of you might be aware that we recently held our agricultural census. That was last year. Reports have been released. According to these results, there's about 71,000 households in Fiji that actually practice agriculture. Once again, dominated by males at about 88%. This sector not only supports local food requirement, but also contributes to our export volumes that we get. You can see the number of or the quantity of production as well as the stock levels that we've got in Fiji. And it has been trailing upwards in the last couple of years, which is a positive trend. This is in realization of our objective to achieve a primary sector-led economy in Fiji, especially after the impacts of COVID-19, which literally wiped out tourism and made us all realize that we cannot have dependency on one particular sector. So it has to be a multi-sector-led economic growth to ensure sustainability. And the good news is we're seeing a lot more interest in agriculture ever since we released this or conducted the census. We know for a fact that the number of agricultural households have increased as more and more people are getting into it at an increased rate than ever before, which is a positive trend. If you look at our growth rates, it has been on an upward trajectory. Now, whilst in the grand scheme of things, one may say that our contribution to the GDP is small, it is definitely moving in the right direction at about 6% in 2019. And it has grown significantly from around $507 million to about $630 and still trending upwards. Our objective is to actually take it to $1 billion. And that's not an impossible task over the next couple of years. And as you can see, the commodities that fundamentally make up this growth are yangona, dalo, cassava, ginger, a little bit of beef, and mostly poultry. So these are the main commodities that actually drive the agricultural sector in Fiji. Now, just in terms of export performance, this is the performance for last year, a year which was predominantly impacted by COVID. And everybody was thinking that agriculture sector will take a nosedive. Contrary to that, we actually grew our exports by 16% in volume and by about 21% in value. It was a phenomenal achievement despite the adversities that we face. Consequently, imports were down. So if you look at the trade balance, it trended favorably. Top 4 exports, remained kava, taro, ginger, and turmeric were 2 commodities that have seen the most significant amount of increase in 2020 compared to previous periods. The potential is still massive, as you can see from the next slides. So, what these charts are trying to show is full potential, which is obviously the blue bar, and the current level of exports, done from Fiji. So, in terms of taro, you can see that we've barely, in 2019 and 2020 as well, it's about between 20 to 30%. Turmeric, very small quantity, eggplants, ginger, cassava, mixture of spices. There's a huge potential to really drive upscaling in production of these particular commodities. Once again, it's only possible if we drive the increase in production through strategic investments, commercial investments, and a lot of focus has been done has been made in these areas to drive commercial operations. Some very successful ventures have been set up through partnership, with private entities, organizations in Fiji, through offshore investors who are also willing to come to really capitalize on the opportunity. COVID-19, especially the second wave, has been a bit of a dampener, but the confidence is returning as Fiji is now on the tail end of the pandemic, and things are trending positive. One of the glaring statistics that we have in Fiji, of all the arable land that's available in Fiji, potentially about 80%, 70 to 80% of arable land in Fiji is underutilized. So if we actually look at the gap in production and the demand that we have got, the key resource, which is land, is there. It's about unlocking the availability of that land through integrating and working in partnership with the landowners, and TLTB, which is the land owning agency, has been very cooperative with us in this area. A lot of land has been made available, so we see that over time this amount, the 80%, will trend downwards as more and more land is turned to productive use. Once again, investment support will drive the accelerated growth in agriculture and drive high utilization of land in Fiji. In terms of opportunities, as I mentioned, commercial agriculture is indeed one of our single biggest focus areas right now. Local food requirements, food industry security requirements are being adequately met. For us, it's about driving the economic agenda, and that will only be possible through driving commercial ventures. Ministry of Agriculture has recently launched some programs, and it's aimed to drive an increase in commercial agriculture models and farms and setups in Fiji, where government will provide direct support to such ventures. We are also driving the inception of technology, farm mechanization, in Fiji, because that's one area where we can definitely drive uptake in production. Farmers, linkages to market. That's an area that will need to be improved. Use of e-agriculture and digital platform is a sure shot way of actually unlocking this potential. Organic farming model, we have recently seen through the programs initiated by the ministry that there's been a significant uptake in organic inputs. So once again, this will continue to be developed, and we hope that Fiji realizes its opportunity to brand itself as a producer of organic products. Value addition of agricultural commodities and coming up with agricultural products is an area which is largely untapped. So the call is there for investors wanting to invest, in this particular area and come up with setups, where they're able to turn agricultural commodities into products. Agritourism, again, is an opportunity. Climate smart agriculture, building resilience in the wake of the disasters that often strikes Fiji, being the tropics, is obviously one focus area for us. And in all of this, building our own capacity, our internal capacity, to ensure that we are able to meet the challenges of future and also drive the upscale in production is going to be a key focus area. Now, this is the last slide. If you look at the potential and livestock sector, as you know, combined together, sheep, beef, and dairy. If we have a potential to actually of about $130 million sector here, if we are able to produce that locally. Currently, all that value is actually going offshore. If you look at rice and vegetables, it exceeds $50 million. Turmeric, taro exports. I also spoke about ginger. The opportunity there is potentially unlimited because we are not able to meet the demand. So if we can combine investment together with providing land that's currently not being utilized, I think we've got a winning formula, and the opportunity is there for investors to come and reap benefits, which can be into millions and millions of dollars. So the ministry remains committed to driving growth in agriculture, promoting ease of doing agriculture in Fiji, and has a range of incentives available to support anybody who wants to actually come and be part of this journey of growth with the agriculture sector in Fiji. Next slide. We would be more than happy to take any questions and comments at the end of the session, but these are our contacts. Please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'd be more than happy to support any potential investor who wants to come in and set up in Fiji. That's from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ritesh, and also thank you, Zarek, for your words and helping setting the scene for today's webinar, which I think is really important. And also thank you to Ivy for her words of in Te Ao Māori today, and also the prayer that she said. Much appreciated, everyone. My name's Graeme Saunders. I'm an investment consultant. I've been working now for Pacific Trade Invest for New Zealand for about 10, 11 months, led by Glenys Miller. And I guess the objective that I was set when I first started was to try to find new sources of capital, new business models to help with the post-COVID recovery, and agriculture is certainly one of the sectors, but not the only sector, I guess, that we've been doing some work in. And I guess this webinar is an output of some of those efforts that we've had in trying to find global organisations that wanted to cast their eye over the Pacific for opportunities and to disperse their not only their capital, but I think more importantly than the capital, their experiences that they've had around the world. So we're very, very happy to have the speakers that we have here today. Just a couple of things that I wanted to talk about in regards to the webinar, some housekeeping, I guess you could say. And first thing is we're going to send out some feedback forms, which I know everyone is always reluctant to fill in. It takes time and all the rest of it. But I guess it's very important for us to get those feedback forms so we can help tailor and adjust and make sure that these webinars are the most beneficial and optimised that we can for the audience out there. So if you can fill those forms in and get them back to us, we would certainly appreciate it. Now, in regards to the questions, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot, we've got a lot of people on this webinar that I'm sure all from the sector that have a lot of questions about IDH and what they do, and also Ata Marie. But if we could hold off on those questions or put them into the box at the bottom of the Zoom application, we'll try to get to all of the questions we can after the speakers have completed their talks. And the ones that we can't get to, we'll certainly get back to you by email with the answers that you require. Now, enough from me. Let me introduce the exciting part of this, which is our speakers. And as Zarek said before, we're very lucky to have George Kuru from Ata Marie join us. And George, I gave a couple of webinars in May, which really set the scene for today's webinar. And I guess the work that they've done in the past of IDH has been instrumental in getting IDH looking to the Pacific and participating in today's webinar. So we certainly appreciate George and what he's done today. And he'll be giving a bit of a recap on, I guess, their efforts so far, recapping, I guess, the two webinars, just to give everyone a bit of context to today's talk. And we are very pleased to have a late addition, but a very special addition to today's speakers. And that is Mrs. Tran Quan Chi, who is the Asian Landscape Regional Director for IDH. We're looking forward to hearing from her later on in the webinar today. And then we'll have Fitrian Ariansa talking, who is the Global Envoy for Nature-Based Solutions and a Country Director for Indonesia and Malaysia for IDH. So thank you to all the speakers who are giving up their valuable time for today's webinar. We have a willing audience with open ears. And I will, as a boring consultant, I'll get out of the way and let the interesting speakers talk about their experiences. So George, if I could hand over to you, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Graeme. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name's George Kuru. I'm originally from New Zealand and I'm based in Jakarta now. I'll start my video. And in May this year, we made two webinars. The first webinar I've been involved in, actually, this is only my second, so you'll excuse me if it's not perfect. But before going on, I'd like to recognise and thank Commissioner Glennis and the Honourable Secretary Des, Mr. Khan, Pakvitrian and Graeme and the others at PTI for this investment. And I'd like to welcome all the participants from all the countries in the Pacific. And so, as Graeme said, we just have a quick recap of those earlier webinars so that people can become familiar and also perhaps set the scene for IDH coming up. So I won't hold you too long. I'm only here for 15 to 20 minutes. Okay. Now I'll just maximize that. Okay, so in May 21, we put together a webinar on funding investment or encouraging investment into the agriculture sector in the Pacific. And I'd like to recognise that the Pacific is a huge region and has a wide range of economies from Fiji, which I suppose is like the powerhouse of the Pacific, to really small, what you'd call microstates. And there's a wide range of needs in that region. So please remember that what we're trying to present here is a more general thing for all countries in the region. That's me. I'm President Director of Atamaria Group, which is based in Jakarta, and I'm originally a forester, but have worked a lot in the agribusiness sector in addition to forestry. And my experience has mainly been in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. And there we are, we're in Indonesia. And we also have offices in other countries of the world. So during the webinar, we looked at a range of issues, but I suppose the important ones we're looking at global trends in investment in agriculture, the different potential investment models that apply to agriculture, strategies for trying to improve the attractiveness of agricultural enterprises to potential investments, and then looking at the sort of documents that we need if you're trying to attract investment, and then technologies that can improve the performance of agricultural investments overall. So I think there were 5 or 6 sessions on a variety of topics, and I've tried to distill some of the important points of those sessions. So when we're considering investment in agriculture, that at some level, at the national or regional level, we have those factors that geopolitical or social economic that sort of provide the base of how investment can be attracted. And I'm not really going to focus on that. That's a political issue by and large. We're focused here on the business level, the factors that can attract investment, and they're things like return on investment, financial risk, and increasingly over the last couple of decades, sustainability. So if we have a look at these drivers, the traditional drivers of return on investment and financial risk of the assets is key. But in addition now, we're seeing investors really require compliance of businesses with environmental, social, and governance requirements, ESG. They're referred to, and they commonly referred to also as sustainability requirements. There are a wide variety of standards, but key ones include the UN Sustainable Development Goals and IFC performance standards. And so these ESG requirements, they're sort of like an overhead now on, preparing investments, but they're also an opportunity for well-designed business proposals that can fast-track investment from these sources compared to others that are less well prepared. So, here's a key one, especially for donor requirements, is the SDG Goals or the SDGs. And in private sector, they often refer to the IFCPS. Now, if we're trying to increase our core focus is on trying to increase investment, and there are a lot of investment institutions internationally offering finance for agricultural development in developing countries. And there's a realization that the Pacific region is not receiving its fair share of this investment funding. I think that's a very fair statement. So how can these investment funds be made aware of agricultural investment opportunities in the Pacific? And how can we encourage them to focus on this region? And finally, how can businesses in the Pacific region better create a pipeline of investable projects in which international funds can be directed? So we discussed different types of investment funds out there, including donor agencies, banking finance, and then specialist funds for agriculture, timber, and ethical investment funds, all of which offer a range of financial products and services, and each with their own specific requirements. And then during the presentation, we had a look at some examples of those. You can see IDH was one of the case studies where we talked about their important role in facilitating business growth, especially for smallholders. And then a range of different types of funds out there. And you'll see Agri III Fund, which actually, my understanding is that that's a fund that has been developed in association with IDH. So you can see that IDH is an important player in this field. And if we critically examine this relatively low level of investment in agriculture in the Pacific, we could identify perhaps reasons behind this, including, maybe an unattractive business environment, a perceived lack of financially attractive investments, a lack of investments at scale, and really a lack of investment proposal pipelines that investors can examine. So in terms of attracting investment, there is this geopolitical, social, economic framework. But then there's also this concept of being able to engage with industry and build some capacity to allow the development of a pipeline, if you like, which can attract direct foreign investment into the region. So when we consider strategies that perhaps can attract more investment, today is one example of us trying to improve engagement with regional, national institutions, with investment organisations, so that we can showcase the region and its strengths and investment opportunities, and encourage these investment institutions to focus on the Pacific region. And that can be done in conjunction with aligning government policy for agricultural investment and FDI. Another thing we can look at is these technical support for agricultural businesses to improve their technologies in management and governance, just making them more attractive businesses for investors. Another area, and which I know is of interest to IDH, is assisting agricultural industry participants to collaborate and integrate to obtain economies of scale. So not only to improve their performance overall, but also, to create a vehicle that's big enough for investors to invest in. And lastly, there's this issue of really improving the investment documentation so that we can de-risk investments and better align those business proposals with investor requirements. Okay. We had a whole session on looking at business proposals. These are the core documents individual businesses need to develop in order to attract investments, from business plans to technical supporting documentation to independent feasibility assessments and documents that support investment negotiations. And lastly, we looked at ways to attract investment to a project through those documentations, and about the importance of having clear and complete project proposals and documentation, providing proposals that address the requirements and preferences of individual investors, and then ensuring that project proposal documentation anticipates the project review process and supports fast tracking. So that's being prepared not only to prepare the document, but also support the negotiation process that follows that. Yeah, we looked at business plans and how business plans are structured. We looked at the importance of supporting technical documentation, which is specifically, which in the agriculture and forestry sector have very specific technical data document requirements. And then making sure that those documents are prepared in a clear and professional way. So they set out the information in a form that's familiar to investors. The data is clear and logical, and the methodology applied is clear and precisely described. And the results presented in a plan that can be easily referenced to supporting data and the business plan, to supporting data, and also that the business plan and the supporting data match each other, and where there are consistencies, these are explained and justified. So all these sort of things help in encouraging the investor to go the final step and invest in the business. Then we had a look at sort of strategic issues around investment, which is it's sort of ensuring that the pitch you make to investors matches the type of funding that the investor offers. So, each type of investor or fund will have eligibility criteria. So and part of this successful investment strategy is to match the investment request with the nature of the investment fund. And we describe different types of funds which had eligibility activities from early bird investment to business development through to full project finance. And then trying to match the terms of the pitch with the acceptable and expected terms that the investor needs for returns on investment and permissible financial risks. And then noting that embedded in these sort of business documents is the need to ensure that they're compliant with the ESG requirements. So, we had some examples and we had a case study with IDH who are very heavily involved in this pre-investment funding. We had a look at New Forests, which was a forestry fund which is involved in both early investment and full-term funding. We had a look at this Agrifund III, which provides bridging finance and other financial instruments pre-full investment. And then we had a look at FMO, which does loans and equity finance. So that's an overview of sort of some of the main findings of our previous webinars, and they're available to the participants, I believe, from PTI, copies of those, and a copy of this will be made available. I hope that sort of set the scene for the presentation that IDH will make coming up, and we've had involvement with IDH over many years. One of our senior consultants used to work at IDH, and we know them very well. And I can personally endorse them as a really terrific organisation that have made big impacts around Asia Pacific. I mean, not Pacific, around Southeast Asia in particular, and throughout Africa and South America. Okay, so I'd like to finish there and then pass it back to to Graeme.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George. Your second webinar, still excellent like the first. Thank you so much for recapping, I guess, the important messages that were given 4 months ago. So thank you once again.
No problem.
And as I mentioned, we have a late edition and a special edition to today's speaking lineup. It's a great pleasure that I'm able to introduce the Asia Landscape Regional Director for IDH, Trung Quynh Chi, and she's going to be speaking today on IDH's global support and partnership in the agricultural sector, creating change to achieve SDGs, and also a vision for the Pacific. So over to you. Thank you and welcome.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so thank you, Graeme, and also thanks a lot, George, for your great foundation presentation, and also very interesting ways of attracting investment into agriculture. Very nice was to IDH as well in Indonesia, which is quite appreciated. So thanks a lot for that. And I'd like to now, on behalf of IDH, to introduce to you about IDH at the global level and also Asia. And first of all, so sorry that our CEO, Dan Bensing, cannot join and deliver this speech because this is still night time in Europe. So he has to send the excuse to all of you. So that's why I have the honor to be here to really deliver what IDH and share has done over the last year and share with you our concepts and approach towards more sustainable agricultural sectors globally and also in Asia. So please allow me to share my screen and let me know if you see it. Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so yes, as IDH, we are the Sustainable Trade Initiative, and we just was established in 2008, which is still quite a young organization. But our mandate right from the beginning is that we have the mandate of accelerating the sustainability in the international supply chains impact across the key SDGs, and as already mentioned by George. Our organization is now funded institutionally by Dutch, Swiss, Danish, and Norwegian governments. We are now working with more than 600 private sector partners. And as you can see here on my right-hand side are all the key names of the corporates that we are now working at the global level, plus also more than 30 NGOs that we are working, like WWF, GIZ, and so many others. At the global level, we are now running 12 commodities, and most of them are the agricultural commodities like aquaculture, forestry sector, coffee, spices, fruit and vegetable. And we are also running one program called textile and manufacturing to also take like the responsible of cotton production globally and bring that to the supply chain of textile manufacturing. And at the global level, we are now running more than 20 landscapes globally in all of the 3 continents, Africa, Latin America, and Asia as well, covering 50 countries globally that we are now working, have the foothold there, have the representative offices, but also have like the partnership relationship with. And since 2021, we as IDH, we focus on the 3 impact themes. at the global level in order to improve the better environment, better income for farmers, and better jobs for workers. So that is very general about IDH. And now when it comes to like what we will deliver for our programs globally in 2021 and 2025 over the next 5 years. So what we aim to is to improve the working conditions for 1.2 million workers and increase the income for 2.4 million smallholders households all globe. In terms of environment, we are now supporting and co-funding and creating investment opportunities to reach nearly 10 million hectares under sustainable land use management. And we will create 2.5 million hectares of land with high carbon stock ecosystems, which is also a very new theme of IDH since 2021, but it creates like a very great attention and also greater investment from IDH side to get the carbon stock into like the theme. And it is not only carbon stock, but it is also to avoid GHG emissions along the supply chain of the big commodities globally. Our aim is to engage 100 companies more in sourcing from the verified sourcing area, which I will get back to you later. What does it mean by verified sourcing area linked with the financing opportunities, and also to leverage the co-funding from the private sector, from the investors, and via our sustainability solutions that I will present to you later. So among the several programs that IDH is running, Landscape is now considered as the biggest program globally of IDH. And by 2025, our transformational outcomes are threefold. The first one is to support and sustain the governance, landscape governance mechanisms to increase the private sector contribution and linkage with the public sector, with knowledge organizations and NGOs. So we consider governance is the really important scaling factors, and also to support the private sector to really contribute to the agenda of SDGs. The second outcomes that we would like to also relating to private sector is to increase the number of global and local companies. And we really appreciate the word local. The local here also means the regional companies as well, in order for them to practice jurisdictional sourcing of sustainable commodities, which is not the normal practice yet, but it is a very interesting and very effective way of sourcing for sustainable commodities, which I will get back later in order to explain to you further on what does it mean by jurisdictional sourcing to reach impact at scale. And on the other hand, along with sustainable commodities, the increase the sustainable use and management of forest, water, carbon, and soil are very important for IDH, and to really attract the investment for resource conservation. And the last outcomes that we would like to attain by 2025 is to apply the production, protection, and inclusion approach in all of the landscape program of IDH through the sustainability programs of corporates and also the governments where we are working in, so that PPI approach or PPI compact can become like a means in order for everyone to agree on the same vision towards the next 5 to 10 years. So in order to reach these outcomes, our approach is always to start from corporate sustainability commitment. And in this slide, you can see that the big corporates like Nestle, Unilever, JDE, all of others, they already made a very public commitment on sustainability carbon emission, like Nestle, they already announced that by 2050, they will reach out to the carbon neutrality inside their value chain, which is a very ambitious target, but Nestle is now putting a lot of investment in order to make that happen. Non-deforestation is also one of the key commitment of almost of the big corporates in the world in order to support for the SDGs on planet. Food safety is something for the health of people and economic viability for farmers. It's also a very stay in the focus of those corporates. And if you can see in down here in this slide, I just only take the three biggest big companies globally in order to show to you how what is the progress of their progress towards those commitments. Now let's take Nestle as one example. So Nestle say that by 2025 they committed to have 100% of their products as sustainable or responsible sourced from the different countries, and by 2020 what they gain is 55%. But when we come to JD or Toshiba, which is a very big brands, you can see that what they gained now is just only like more than 20%. So then how can these corporates can fill the gap of like from 30% to 50% from now until 2025? This is a very big and ambitious targets that the corporates already put it there, and IDH and along with the other partners are now supporting them, providing them the solutions so that they can reach out to their sustainability commitment by 2025 and 2050. Yeah. So then starting from this corporate sustainability commitment, as IDH landscape program, we prepare this conceptual framework for our landscapes work in the different countries with the different corporates and investors. And the stakeholders we will work with is among them are companies, governments, including the local and grassroots governments, NGOs, farmers, and communities. Yeah. And then we intervene in changing or transform the business practices, improve the governance structure between public and the private sector, and create impact at the field level. So that we can reach out to the production, protection, and inclusion targets. And after like creating the trust among the partners, and create the new business models for the sustainable landscape for investors, we are carrying out about the scaling. So how can we make these pilots to move forward towards more scaling at the larger scale? So for us, the 5 key factors that are quite important for these scalings are policies, market opportunity, networking means partnership between public, private sector, and also local community, business models or business cases for sustainable landscapes or sustainable production, protection and inclusion, and lastly, investment is quite important. And as you can see from the earlier presentation by George, he already mentioned about Agrifund III or Agrifund Fund, which IDH is now like the technical assistance facility in order to support and to create the investable business cases so that investors can come and invest at the larger scale so that we can really bring the pilots into the larger scale for impact. So among all of these factors, I'd like to mention 2 things, markets and business, which are quite important factors in order to create more investment into the landscape. So SourceUp is one of that solutions that IDH has developed since 2017 and 2018. And the SourceUp is the cooperation platform for supply chain sustainability change maker. And this is the online platform that if you go to the Google, you can search it very easily, that the SourceUp is the place that where the buyers and the global buyers can really show their progress in commitment towards sustainable production, protection, and inclusion that they already supported in the different field level in the landscapes. And they will become the sustainability change maker with impacts that already put it there. So this is how the platform, or what we call it, the new market solution, work under the name of the SourceUp, where we have a three important part of it. The first one is the compact, what we call is the compact, or you can call it the PPI compact, Production, Protection, and Inclusion Compact. And the compact here include all of the coalitions, consists of farmers, producers, governments, corporates, civil societies. They have joined together and agreed on a vision and the very clear targets over the next 5 years or 10 years for the compact for this vision. And a compact here normally means administrative border of one district, let's say from 30 to 50,000 hectares of agricultural land and 100,000 hectares of forest land, for example. In the case of Indonesia, it will be big, much bigger with a larger forest land, but Pak Fitrian will get back to that later. And the second component of this market solution, we cannot avoid to mention about committed buyers. And the word committed here is very important, and there are a number of levels of commitment here. But the committed buyers can support the compacts, monitor progress, deliver on their sustainability commitments, but they also commit to source products from these compacts to create differentiation and incentives for the farmers to continue to invest in the compact. So this is a really organic relationship between the compact and the buyers, even those are very big and the global buyers like Nestle or JD or Unilever, but they still see via their support how the impactful of their sustainability commitment towards the progress change at the compact level. And in order to connect all of these together, the online platform to connect the committed buyers to coalition at the compact level is quite important, so that all the information, the progress of the compact are put transparently on the website, verified by the group of corporates and experts and civil societies in order to really verify the progress at the compact level before it goes to the platform. So this is now still in the process of development, but we can see how impactful and how scalable it is with this new market solution called SourceUp. And the main approach of this SourceUp tool is really to connect all of these fragmented approaches towards that lead to the isolated projects. As you can see, the conventional way of doing projects with the investment from the corporate, the private sector, but also the public sector is like this. But when we apply like the SourceUp mechanism, all of these projects will be falling under one compact, where all the key partners will shake their hands, sign the agreement, put their investment together, and monitor it towards sustainability performance in the end. And this is really the continuous improvement. It is quite different from certification scheme, which say yes or no, this is certified or not certified. But this region, this SourceUp region says that you are now continuously improving in terms of sustainability. And in order, the very important backbone for this compact to really make it investable is really the business case. And the business case here is the core in order for corporates, the farmers and investors to really have incentives to continue their sustainable investment into the compacts, which the grants support, the aid money cannot be there forever. So that is really the backbone of this compact in order to make it more scalable and to reach impact. So there are three value propositions on the SourceUp that I'd like to share with you very quickly. Firstly, the shared information among the partners, transparent information among the partners, tangible impact that both corporates, local governments, national governments, and globally can also see that tangible impacts, and inclusive collaborations. Here we mean also the smallholders is also there in this collaboration and witness that, contributing to that. Now we come to Asia, right? In Asia now we have, at this moment we have 8 landscapes. From next year, at this moment we have 10 landscapes. Next year we will have 8 landscapes, but the scope of the landscape is bigger. And in Asia, we divided our landscapes into 3 groups. Palm oil-based landscapes where we will focus on West Kalimantan, Lusa ecosystem, Papua of Indonesia, and Sabah in Malaysia. We will also have the coffee-based landscapes in the central highlands of Vietnam, Lusa ecosystem in Indonesia, and Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka in India. And we also have the cotton-based landscapes in Madhya Pradesh of India. And this is the maturity stages of these landscapes that you can see. In IDH, we divide our milestone or our journey towards transformational change into the 5 stages, from scoping until creating multi-stakeholder coalition, develop the PPI compact, develop the governance structure, and deliver transformation change. And you can see that all of these 8 landscapes are now going through like a multi-stakeholder coalitions towards a more sustainable, inclusive land use, governance, and already create impact. We still have still a way to go from this towards transformational change. And as we can see that it is like a long-term investment. This is not just only within 5 years, but we are all trying to attain that until, like, let's say by 2025, by 2050, 100% of the coffee in Vietnam, India, and Indonesia will be neutral emission and responsible produced. Or 2 million hectares of sustainable land will be managed and protected. It means forest, peatland, and mangrove in Indonesia and Malaysia. 100% of palm oil in Indonesia and Malaysia will be sustainably produced. And then we also have like the more detailed targets by 2030. Right? So until now, what is our achievement is that until 2021, and our landscape program started in 2016, we already piloted like a 5 SourceUp platform like that in Asia. We already created 8 green growth action plans, 7 PPI compacts, leverage 23 million euros of private sector investment, and bring in 22 million euros of investment from the different impact fund globally to make to invest further to make the scalability happens in this area. And we also successful in market convening to really bring the big corporates to make the commitment of sourcing, like Unilever and PepsiCo. They committed sourcing from Aceh in Indonesia. JDE made the commitment of responsible sourcing from our compact in Vietnam, and also many other powers of market convening as well. So now talking to investment fund, Farmfit Fund, I'd like to really quickly go through with you one example of the Farmfit Fund that IDH is now working with the corporates and the donors to support for de-risking the fund to be provided for the smallholders. And from the beginning, IDH and the fund will share the risk of the first loss guarantee in order to support the smallholders, in order for them to de-risk the investment from the beginning. And then after that, in the second loss, IDH Farmfit Fund and also USAID also come in and support and share the second lots of this Farmfit Fund as well. So with that, we also put the impact targets by 2025 via palm oil, coffee, and the cotton-based, with a very clear impact targets that we would like to achieve by 2025. But for this moment, I'd like to stop here. And before the stop the word thank you, I'd really like to invite all of you to really see how we should collaborate with each other for more impactful landscape linked with less responsible sourcing as our contribution to SDGs. So thanks a lot for this, and I hope that this is helpful for you, and also Farmfit will also deliver the more insightful examples from Malaysia and Indonesia for our palm oil landscape. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for that. That was really, really interesting, and certainly lots of information for all of our audience to embrace, and you might get some questions coming at the end of the webinar around it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, as mentioned previously, is Fitrian Ardiansa, the Global Envoy for Nature-Based Solutions and the Country Director for Indonesia and Malaysia. He's going to be speaking on developing sustainable trade and investment and lessons learned from IDH. So without further ado, Fitrian, please.
Thank you, Graeme. First and foremost, thank you so much for the invitations from the Pacific Island Forum. I would like to acknowledge first Mr. Ritesh Das, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture in Fiji, Ms. Glynis Miller, the Trade Commissioner from New Zealand, and of course, good friend George Kuru, and also Graeme. Thank you so much. This is a very good moment and timely, I think, to share our experience in Asia, and hopefully we can develop or collaborate, like Chi has mentioned, in the Pacific Island nations. So without further ado, I would like to share with you some of the examples, concrete examples that we have done in Indonesia and Malaysia. Hopefully this can be, hopefully this can be replicated or learned further in Pacific Island nations. I hope you can see the presentations, everyone. So I just skipped the introductions of IDH. Chi has already done that amazingly. But I just want to focus on Indonesia and Malaysia for the time being. As you can see, like Chi also mentions, most of the time we started from the demand side. That's why we are mostly focusing on supply chains or commodities that are globally traded. But of course, eventually, we will also cover some commodities that are cultivated locally and also produced and traded locally or regionally, because at the end of the day, when we focus on certain commodities as flagship commodities, we are also covering what we call the sourcing area of the landscape, like Chi has mentioned. So in the cases of Indonesia, we are focusing from the western part of Indonesia, which is the Aceh province, to the very eastern part of Indonesia, which are the two provinces of West Papua and Papua, in which I think share quite similar characters as well as landscapes with the Pacific Island nation, or some of the Pacific Island nations. So as Chi has mentioned, we in many ways we work through collaboration. So with good partnerships with, first of course, off-takers, the buyers. So the committed buyers, they are so important. Because without the appetite, the signal from the buyers or off-takers, it will be so challenging to work directly with farmers or with farmlands or with the supply chain in the upstreams. We have to know what is the requirement, what will be the standards, for instance, what will be the volumes and also quality required at the market, be it nationally or globally. But of course, farmers are millions, and I think Mr. Ritesh Das also has mentioned that the challenging parts of so many different activities and also farmers in Fiji and also in different Pacific islands. In the context of Indonesia and Malaysia, there are just millions of them. So we can't just directly work with individual farmers. We have to find good aggregators. So these aggregators can be, considered or can be in the form of cooperatives, can be in the form of local companies or local processing facilities, For palm oil, for instance, the mills, for cocoa, like factories or fermented facility, and so on and so forth. But with good aggregators, usually you could cover good numbers of smallholders or farmers, in which then you can address or identify issues or gaps. In many ways, in Indonesia and Malaysia, I mean, many smallholders are facing what we call, lack of productivity due to lack of input or low quality of input materials, the low level of a good agriculture practice, maybe not even an existence of good system, like she has already mentioned. But even since the beginning, we know that in terms of addressing such gaps, we need to find good investments to support that. That's why from the get-go, from the beginning, we work directly with off-takers, to committed buyers, and of course, the willing financiers. So we know that when it comes to challenges in developing sustainable commodities, so the sustainable agriculture, it's not only about low level of productivity, but also this connects so much with the low level of welfare or livelihood of smallholders and small farmers. If they don't have any options, they have a low level of living income, for instance, they even cannot think about the investment for their own farms. So it's quite challenging, and that's why we have to target this kind of business model in providing a good structure of finance to support them. But in the meantime, or at the same time, they are also facing not only, smallholders, but also local companies, huge environmental impacts, deforestation. She has already mentioned forest and land fires in the case of Indonesia, for instance, water scarcities, and maybe we have to think quite wide in terms of what sort of things that we can do and start from where. I think in the cases of IDH, we try to find the best possible solution in terms of business and investment model that could lead to productivity of local smallholders or local companies. But like she said, this P, the first P, the first productions improvement needs to be associated with the protections, the second P, and then of course inclusions of smallholders. That's why the package of the support will be coming with the PPI approach of production, protection, inclusions. She also has already mentioned about so many different partners that we work, especially corporate partners, but also just to name some good initiatives that, in fact, even with private sector partners, we also have options to work with them within certain platforms. So it's not only individual corporate partners, but also within certain platforms. So in Asia, we got Grow Asia. I think this Grow Asia is aiming at developing sustainable agriculture across Asia. But below the level of Grow Asia, in each individual country, those countries have also developed a similar platform. Like in Indonesia, they call it Peace Agro, Partnership for Indonesia Sustainable Agriculture, in which I'm one of the board members. I think in Vietnam, she could also mention there another platform. There is another platform in the Philippines as well. This would help not only sharing the knowledge, discussions, addressing similar challenges, but also acting as a certain pressure groups toward government and also toward investors, showing to them the needs to support farmers, to support certain interventions in the agriculture sectors. In addition to the general platform of agriculture, sustainable agriculture in individual countries or also at the global level, usually we have and we support platform for certain commodities like Global Coffee Platform. In Indonesia, we translated into SCOPI, Sustainable Coffee Platform Indonesia, Cocoa Sustainability Partnerships, and many others. I will share with you why this is quite important later on. But in many ways, before we, let's say, develop good business and investment model, and she has already mentioned this quite correctly, we target first working and collaborating with the government, because the government needs to take the leads. So it is quite, good to see the leaderships of Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture here, Mr. Ritesh Das, for instance, because I think government needs to develop certain regulatory framework in the beginning to show that they can and they were willing to attract sustainable investment coming to a certain nation and also certain landscapes. In our case, for instance, we work closely with the government at the national level, provincial, and also local level to develop what we call Green Growth Plan. The Green Growth Plan then is not only acting as a document to be referred to, but also this document will be then mainstream into the government midterm development agenda, and also annual program, and more importantly, it is going to be translated, or it is translated into budget. Without the translation to the budgeting system of the government, it will be much more challenging to facilitate and also to attract private sector or financial institution investment to come to particular countries, because they would also like to know whether there is a seriousness or appetite coming from certain governments to have this kind of sustainable and green investment to come. And of course, like Chi as already mentioned, we developed this kind of compact agreement and following up with that verified sourcing area. And then of course, with that, then we can allow certain green investment to come in. This is just some examples of the Green Growth Plan process, from developing it with the government at the provincial level or state level in some countries, and then translating it into midterm development planning and translating it further into annual budgeting. And then based on that, we then push forward piloting or prototyping certain verified sourcing area in different landscapes in Indonesia, for instance, as well as in Malaysia. The connections, like Chi said, the commitment from buyer is key. The development of system of supply chain transparency is key, and also the foundation is the PPI agreement or PPI compact. I will just show briefly some of the examples of these actions in Aceh and North Sumatra, the western part of Indonesia, for instance. Green Growth Plan is developed, PPI compact also has been established, in which then you have that kind of agreement among private sector producers and players with local NGOs and local communities with the leadership of local government, acknowledging and also understanding what will be the objectives of productions, how many hectares, how many tonnage of certain commodities, and then what will be the protection agenda, how many hectares that they need to save or protect or patrol, control, conserve, restore, and so forth, as well as how many smallholders that we want to target as priority. With that kind of knowledge, understanding, and agreement, then we then understand further the requirement for investment. And then the discussions with the investors would then lead to certain numbers of appetite, linkage to the need of this landscape or these provinces in terms of the required investment. And the investment is not only for productivity, but also for the protection of forests, conservations, and also improving smallholders' livelihood. So this is just an example in Aceh, just zooming in again. As you can see, in Aceh, we are focusing in two districts, Aceh Tamiang and Aceh Timur. This is the eastern part of a huge loiser ecosystem, a forest area, more than 1 million hectares. But in this buffer zone, the location, like Chi has mentioned, is mostly the cultivation of farmers and local concessions are cultivating palm oil and rubber. But because of the low level of productivity, the usual options for them to increase their productivity is to encroach or to expand the concession of farmlands to this forest area. As a result, big companies or big buyers or brands who would like to source from, let's say, legal and also green sourcing areas, in the past, they just cut this kind of sourcing or supply chains. Then, as a result, it has impacted smallholders as well as local concession and local company. Revenue will not come. So we got this agreement. That's why the PPI compact is important, in which buyers are committed to support not only source, but also to support the transformations of the sustainable production or production towards sustainability for palm oil, rubber, and different commodities in the buffer zone, mapping different smallholders with also smart climate agricultures. That's why we got support from different governments on NISCOP, National Initiative for Smart Climate Oil Palm Smallholders, and different ways in which not only then the big brands are committed to buy, but also committed to invest in restorations, in protections, and so on. Similar case in different province in Jambi, but the focus mostly in the beginning is to address land legality of smallholders. I don't know in Pacific Islands, I have to be honest with you, but in Asia, most of the time farmers do not have legal status of their land whenever they're cultivating. As a result, they cannot be sustainable because they cannot access to finance because they don't have that kind of legal land certificate. So the first instance, we realized with our corporate partners this kind of challenge. The investment then was packaged to support the transformation system in that districts, and then collaboration with the government push forward the accelerations of land legality. As a result, now 10,000 or more hectares of smallholders, independent smallholders, are already certificate or having that kind of certifications. And because of that, this is like a good entry point for getting access to finance coming from the banks, financial institutions, and many others. West Kalimantan is also relatively similar, but they are mostly also with medium and also big companies, not only with smallholders. But there's also a good commitment based on the PPI compact or PPI agreement. This has led to even further support coming from the government to develop or to establish what we call KEE, which is Essential Ecosystem Area. In the past, many palm oil companies, if they own lands, they have to just cultivate the land, 100% without setting aside or giving some area, allocating some area for protection or conservations. But the requirement from the market to have high conservation value areas protected, high carbon stock also protected and managed, would have no match with this legal requirement from the government. So with this KEE agreement, companies then could negotiate with the government that some of the areas that have been identified as high conservation value areas are acknowledged as part of protections or having protection functional status, but in the wider landscape, and it is acknowledged by the government right now. So this also has created the good incentives for companies to have good link with the global market as well. I will share with you, this is, I think, very much quite maybe unique, as well as having good alignment or similarity with the Pacific Island nations. This is the case in West Papua province, and we have been focusing in West Papua and Papua provinces since 3 years ago, so it's still new. And then in the beginning, we worked together with the government, both at the national level and the two provinces, to develop what we call Green Investment Blueprint for Papua and West Papua. The idea is quite simple. We want to support private sector, government, and also, of course, indigenous people to have option for investment without having further deforestations. So it's simple, but it's challenging. So we have identified certain commodities that are considered forest friendly. One of them is cocoa. Others than that, I think spices and other certain commodities, including coffee. So in the context of cocoa, we got this fortunate example in West Papua in a district called South Manokwari, a specific area called Ransiki. In the old days, CDC, some of you may have known, CDC is a British company, cultivated cocoa with the indigenous communities here for 3,000 hectares, but they left maybe because of no longer lucrative or productive or profitable. And then the local cooperatives owned and managed by indigenous communities, they only cultivated now up to 300 hectares. So it was traditional. They had the good fermentations, but they had no access to market. So we went there with, of course, the support of local government and local stakeholders, attracting also leading chocolatier from Belgium, and then tested this cocoa beans, fermented cocoa bean, and he reckoned that this cocoa bean is one of the best in the world. I think maybe because of the old clone and things related to that. And we work together with certain big companies. Of course, big companies require a big volume. So they didn't want to go first. So then we directly shifted our focus to small to medium fine flavor cocoa, including people tin. So they support the packaging, they support the quality control and assessment. And first, it was then sold in the domestic market for Indonesia, and it gained traction, 100% sold out already 1 year ago, and then it was then sold and exported to Japan. And from last year to now, it gained so much attractions. It is now being sold in the UK, France, even some markets that we haven't heard before, Lithuania, Latvia, and Russia. So even the king and queen of the Netherlands, when they went to Indonesia, they went to this particular factory and they tested the chocolate directly. And one of the key narratives that is quite attractive for businesses or investors is the fact that these areas of cocoa plantations managed by indigenous community, that's a good narrative already, is located in the buffer zone of Arfak Mountain, which is the habitat of the bird of paradise, just recently found by leading expert or scientists like 2 or 3 years ago. So it was just a perfect combinations of indigenous communities, productions of cocoa, as well as conservations and protections of habitat of bird of paradise. So Malaysia is also similar. We're focusing in sourcing area in Sabah. Again, the leaderships of the national or federal government and the state government is important. Connection to the trader and companies that sourcing palm oil from these areas, and then also agreeing on certain areas that cannot be developed and have to be protected is also key. With that, we have already attracted some good investment to come in. So Chi has already mentioned this. It is now ready. I think this is something that we can explore further with some Pacific Island nations. So around $500 million is available at the global level, managed by our investment fund partners from Green Fund to TLFF, Tropical Landscape Fund Facility. The structure of financing, I think we can explore further. But of course, it needs to have good committed buyers, the off-takers, the producer company as well. It needs to have like first loss guarantee being structured by this fund with certain donors, as well as Chi mentioned with USAID or OZ or New Zealand aid. Perhaps they would like also to be involved. And of course, then finding good aggregators, in this case, perhaps cooperatives or local companies that can provide the scope for farmers. So these are the examples of some of the deals that we have already facilitated in Indonesia, especially. 23 million for sustainable deforestation-free rubble given to joint ventures between Indonesian company and Michelang in Jambi, and another one is 30 million for palm oil company in East Kalimantan. And then one of the most, let's say, happy interventions that or facilitation that we made is 6 million euro facilitated for village forest, social forestry program related to certain commodity that has been developed by local communities in West Kalimantan. As you can see, we invested with our private sector partners in the beginning to find option for commodities, developing companies, a company that has shares of local indigenous communities, as well as creating this kind of credit union so they can learn about finance and that kind of transactions. And once they are productive, we link them to with certain commercial investment with, of course, soft loan, different type of structural financing. But what we don't forget is, of course, adding to the element is forest protection, forest restoration, because that's the requirement that is needed by our investment partners. So I'll skip this. These are maybe too much, but I think I can share with you this document of the presentations. But basically, many different models related to conservations, productivity of smallholders, indigenous communities, but the connection with buyers and also investors from the beginning. Last but not least, I will wrap it up, Graeme. There's now certainly also a growing appetite coming from companies to even attach their investment with carbon. and climate change play this. This is quite new, but I think some Pacific Island nations have the potential to develop this with the help of companies or consultants like Atamari and others. So thank you so much, Graeme. Terima kasih. And I don't know whether I say this correctly, Kia ora. So thank you.
Perfect. Terima kasih. Terima kasih, Fitrian. Thank you. And thank you to all our speakers today. Look, really a lot of information, a lot of valuable information. I think that everyone on the Pacific Islands can certainly learn from, and we will certainly send around the presentations. But in the meantime, look, we've got a lot of time now for questions and answers, which I'm sure everyone will be keen to participate in. But I also have noticed that Chi's been very active in answering a lot of questions already. And I just wonder, it's probably a good idea for those that haven't read all of the answers, perhaps if we go over some of the more pertinent questions and answers to share with everyone that I'm sure are very general for everyone's knowledge. So I might just start off, first of all, just by getting some of those questions. Okay, the first question is, we need expertise to help us shape this proposal to hit the investors. Any ideas? Now, I think that's a very, very good question. And I guess part of George's presentation was really focused on that, the 2 webinars we gave, but certainly, I guess in response from Chi, basically, yes, the proposal is to shape proposals for large-scale sustainable sourcing areas for corporates at landscape levels. There we need to credit and grant support for smallholder farmers, but also middlemen to really trickle down the impact at the field level. The next question is, do IDH engage directly with entities with a workable initiative? And yes, we do. We have collaborated very closely with local governments to set up sustainability targets and co-investment mechanisms. Central governments are also very important for legal framework, but also alignment with public sector. At provincial level, we also collaborated to develop green growth plans to set vision of green growth to attract investment. I think this question, I think, is a very obvious question, and one that I think perhaps we could expand on a little bit. And I guess this comes that we can combine this with another question as well. And the question is, what sort of funding limit is it? For example, $1 million, is that the minimum? But when we're talking about, I guess, having an idea and having a feasibility study, I'm just wondering, Fitrian or Chi, whether there's any mechanism for a bunch of smallholder farmers that perhaps don't have the money to do a feasibility study or the like. How would you approach that? What sort of solutions would you offer to them?
Maybe I can start and Chi can help a lot. I think we, as Chi has mentioned, we are now partnering with certain investment partners or investment fund. And they have already asked us to be their technical assistant facility partner, which means that certain money has been allocated to support the development of proposal, incubating the business model, Graeme. And I think we are quite open. Of course, like Chi and me have already mentioned earlier, we haven't focused in the Pacific. So this is probably the first discussions that we had. Of course, we are keen to discuss further. We, of course, have no idea yet about the needs and the gaps. So we also need to be helped when it comes to where, when, how much, and how large. And with that knowledge, it will be so much helpful. Then we can link to the technical assistance facility as well as the investment fund partners. Those 5 that we have mentioned, Graeme. But also there are some other impact investors. They are also looking for options in these regions, including, I think, in the Pacific. Chi, you want to add?
Yes, thank you very much. No, I think that Fitrian, you already mentioned quite very clearly and very comprehensive of the answer. Yes, in Asia, as you can see, that we focus mostly in Southeast Asia. So Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia. We also cover India and upcoming is Chinese markets. But for China, we just only focus on the market side. We do not focus on the production end yet. But however, for the other part of Pacific, which is still a very potential large landscapes that we can explore further with you, the IDH's approach is not like approaching individual companies or individual farmer organizations or communities to work with. We will first create the framework for them to work together. And then they will build from there in order to see what are the projects that can contribute to achieve the sustainability targets of that area. So in that end, if they have like the umbrella and the framework to work together like that, and their project is part of that, which will help them to really learn a lot from others, but also to get to trigger the more the better business cases if they are within one part. Because if it is like a long a part of value chain, for example, of a value chain of a company, then that would be much easier for them to have both investments but also commitment of sourcing from the buyers as well. So it is not just only like investment is the only way, right? So market is also a very important solution to create the incentives for the farmers. And as you can see that when we go to the community, the first question the farmers always ask, what is the price of this product, right? If I join this, how much I will get more? So that is always like the economic viability is always the first incentives for farmers. In our landscapes, we do not talk about premium price, differentiated price, but we say that you can save a lot of your costs if you follow the way that you do it sustainably, right? So that business case is quite important. But if it's just only one farmer, there's hardly have the business case. If we have 50 farmers, 100 farmers, 1,000 farmers, even 100,000 farmers, the business case is different. So that is where IDH will not reach out to the different smallholders or community group, etc. But what we do is at the larger scale to create that larger scale business case.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess another question, and look, I guess the general view that I get is IDH has a solution for most scenarios in agriculture, which is great. You've got a big toolkit for various scenarios in different markets and different business models. But a question that's been raised, and I see you've answered it here, but perhaps you might want to expand on this, because I think a smallholder farmer, what does that mean? What is small, I guess, in regards to land area? How can people qualify that as a prerequisite?
You go first.
Yes, so the definition of small is very varied, and as I put it in my chat, right? It is very varied from this country to the other. So, like the case of Africa, what we see is like a 1 hectare, 2 hectare is the smallholders. In Vietnam, is even half an hectare is also a smallholder. We don't have the maximum figure, we have to say, but normally IDH will support the farmers with less than 5 hectares, and that is what we call the smallholders. But apart from the smallholders, as you can see that we cannot ignore the bigger farmers, or we cannot ignore like the middlemen who are now sourcing from those farmers, because they are quite essential to create that sustainability. Because they are the one who also provide inputs for the farmers, fertilizer, seedlings, pesticide. And if we don't make them responsible, provision of services, they will provide whatever makes sense in terms of just economic for the farmers. And in that sense, in the long run, sustainability cannot be there, right? So, and then they also are the one who buy a lot of products from those smallholders as well. So we can see that in our program, we also embrace the input providers and middlemen. And also, Peter, you can talk more about the private concessionaires in the case of Malaysia, Indonesia as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think smallholders vary quite a lot. In Indonesia, it's around 2 to 3 or less than 4 hectares. Graeme, you know much better. In Malaysia, even yes, there are smallholders like that, but we even put the outgrowers that we identify as important players to be supported as well, because outgrowers, even if they have like 100 or 200 hectares, they still are not associated with big companies. And then you got also second to third tier companies. This is quite tricky. They are companies, they own usually by local landlords or local rich guys or ladies, but they are still also are not connected directly with big companies, perhaps only sourcing or supply chains type of contract. And if we don't, like Chi has mentioned correctly, if we don't work with them, we most likely overlook the importance of their roles in transforming the entire sourcing area or the entire landscape into sustainability. And in many cases, Graeme, these second and third tier companies and then agents and middlemen or middle ladies, they are quite needed to have that kind of aggregations and scale. So we can work directly with them to support, because not all cooperatives are functioning. In the case of Indonesia, I think we can also say that some even farmers do not trust cooperatives because of the old days of the political dynamics. And we certainly work together with like the middleman or the agents in commodities or certain commodities and also landscape, because they have that kind of cross connection with farmers. Farmers, when they have issues related to educations of their children, getting married again, perhaps, they go to this middleman to ask for money. So it's like upfront finance. Even like financial institution will not do that. So we work together with them, but transforming their functions into much better services to farmers. So they not only providing such finance, for instance, but also providing agronomic services, support for farmers. Of course, us as well as our corporate partners, what's in it for them. So in the case of North Sumatra and some areas, they are particularly happy to be part of the sustainable supply chains, because if they are being part of this kind of supply chain, they can get, let's say, good treatment. Let's say first queuing, going to facilities or processing facility or mills of palm oil or rubber, for instance. So it's like frequent flyers. So for the middleman, for them, it really can cut short the time for queuing. Like if you look at the processing facility or mills in Indonesia, you have to wait for about 6 hours or so. And then you cut it like to only 2 hours. Because of that, they can go back to the other farmers, and then they collect fruits and others, and they can go back again to processing facility. It's not only cutting short the time for queuing, but also adding up the ability to cover certain farmers and productivity. So the value related to that is really let's say identified quite highly by the middlemen, and we work together with those middlemen because of that as well. So we have to find some innovation, but it depends so much on the context or local context in many ways as well.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Fitrian. Look, I've got a question here that I think is an interesting one, because I think part of the challenge for the people in the Pacific, and this came through in the last series of webinars we gave when George was talking about Indonesia and Africa and some of the projects there. So I'll just read this question out because I think it's relevant, and I think people would really like to get your thoughts on this and how it might work. And that is, for tourism-based microeconomies like the Cook Islands, COVID-19 has reminded us of the need to diversify into sectors like agriculture. I listened to the presentations, but I'm failing to understand how these best practices being used in larger Southeast Asian countries can be replicated in microstates with populations of less than 20,000, for example. So I think that's certainly a recurring theme, and yeah, if both of you could give some thoughts around that, that would be, I think, really helpful.
Maybe I can start a bit, Chi. So that's why I share one example, and we got 2 or 3 other examples in West Papua and Papua. The populations in certain districts and certain areas are also low. And because of that, options for them are also relatively low. And in fact, if you go to West Papua in the past, before COVID, they depend so much on ecotourism. You know, people came to Raja Ampat Islands. So with COVID, it was almost non-existent. In Bali as well, that island, so famous with tourism, it is almost non-existent. 70% or something just suddenly reduced or gone because of COVID-19. So we work together with provincial government or local governments in these areas. Of course, this is not country, but because they are so far away from the rest of Indonesia, I think we can also see that they are becoming or being isolated in the trade and investment type of supply chain solutions. So we try to find key commodities that can provide better or higher added value. That's why the fine flavor cocoa in that case is one of the examples. But building it gradually, working together with cooperatives to find the best possible solutions to get to the quality required by the buyers. And then once they got it and they have this kind of trust with the buyers, everything then follows suit. And now, for instance, they got much more buyers than the supply. So the 300 hectares of cocoa farmers in West Papua, we are trying now to expand in, of course, existing plantation that have been forgotten. But that, of course, requires investments. Now we are negotiating with certain investors whether they want to do. And of course, the financial institutional investors, they're still looking for options to have this kind of scalability. I mean, 300, 200 hectares or 500 hectares may not necessarily be sufficient for those financial institutions. So now we are working or negotiating and exploring with certain fintech, Graeme, that have much more ideas or appetite for impacts rather than volume or quantity. So maybe in the Pacific Islands, nations, those that are so much dependent on tourism in the past, and then the volume for certain commodities is not that high. Maybe we need to find, really added value or higher value for certain commodity, fine flavor cocoa, sustainable fishery or aquaculture, or whatever that can be directly linked to buyers that are willing to buy that with that amount, but also investors that are looking for impacts. The narratives, I think, is quite crucial to be linked to climate change, conservation of the sea, or conservation of forests. But this is just my first response. Maybe I'm wrong. See?
Yes, thank you, Pakistan. You are not wrong. You are right in that sense, because to be honest with you, in order to create really tangible impact, you cannot go too big in one compact. So I think 50,000 hectares of the agricultural land, I think is the biggest we should reach out to. Otherwise, we cannot manage the impact. And at that sense, and even within that 50,000 hectares of agricultural land, we still have to categorize them further and further to bring the different projects inside that. But normally the one PPI compact that we work with is around like 20,000, 30,000 hectares of land. What I mean is agricultural land. For forestry land is a bit different because the size can be much bigger, like Indonesia. In Indonesia, the forestry land in the compact can be higher, but it doesn't request so much of investment and it doesn't request so much of monitoring in order to make that happen. So, but for agricultural land, it should only be like a 20, 30,000 hectares for one compact to be manageable and to see the tangible impact out of the investment that we already put in. So that in one area, we can develop like a number of compacts like that if the size is too big, or we can, in your question, you asked, right, 20,000 hectares. I think that is perfect just only for one compact because that is the normal size that we are now working with.
Great, thank you. I'm just, I guess this question is one that probably is reading into the future a little bit, but I think Look, a good question to ask, because I guess with someone, an organisation like yourselves that has a lot of demand for your services in the markets that you're already operating, you know, you need project pipelines. You need to know there's opportunities there, cultural sectors that are willing to work with you. And certainly, you know, I guess by some of the people that we have on this webinar today, there's definitely an interest to work with you, and we certainly can identify a number of opportunities already for you to work on. So I guess my question would be, if we do, and we do already have opportunities at hand, and I'm sure there'll be more coming to us after this webinar, I guess to get IDH operating in the Pacific, I mean, what is it that you need to see? What are the criteria? How can we help people that want to reach out to you now that have opportunities? How do you suggest that they engage with you, or how can we help, I guess, as a pretty big question, but I think it's an important one, and one that everyone looking at some of the questions I can see have already put their offers forward for opportunities. So if I could get both of your thoughts on that, that'll be fantastic.
Yes, thanks a lot. And I think that this is also a very visionary question, right? It's interesting at this moment. Our short answer is that that we are now, as you can see from my presentation, we are now working in the 8 landscapes in Asia. So out of those 8 landscapes, if your areas or your projects or your production area is within these 8 landscapes, is easier for us to work together, because we already have the team at the field level to manage the program, to facilitate for connection under the PBI compact, and discuss with the partners to engage you further with that. So I think that is very straightforward. But if the areas that you are not within our 8 landscapes at this moment, I think for IDH now, in terms of grants, we don't have any funding for going beyond these 8 landscapes in Asia Pacific. So if we really see that now we have an interest of public and the private sector, we see the interest of the farmer organizations or NGOs within other landscapes, we can really frame the proposals together and reach out to the donors like Australia or New Zealand or any funders for the grant, because in order to start with this program, it is hard to start with an investment fund because we need to create the governance structure. We need to create the business case piloted in that area first. We need to engage and convening with the private sector there so that we can really frame it first, and we need the grant to do that. And then when we have the scalable business case, then we can bring the investors, the investment funds, impact funds to come and scale our business case that we already have. And one of the things that is quite important to IDH is that we really need to select the areas that is like the key or the mainstream products that linked with the global markets and regional markets. So the case of palm oil, for example, is that it is very essential to EU market, but now it is also very essential to China, India, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, etc. So therefore, we reach out to, because we want to reach to scale. So we will select a mainstream products that has a high volume at the global level and for the global markets. We also have some cases that we work with a niche market with the specialty products, like the case of Andhra Pradesh in India, that we are now working with the specialty coffee and specialty pepper as well, in order to provide, but also to the global market. And there we already have like existing buyers, we already engage them, and now we open up for the new landscapes, and then we bring them in. So the market elements from the beginning of setting up the new landscape is quite important for IDH, because we really need to understand their interests. That is the areas that they want to take it as the showcase, so that we frame it together, and then we have like the hotspots and impactful areas so that we can bring it as the interesting case for our donors to reach out and to really balance between aid and trade there. Thanks. Vivian, if you want to add anything?
No, not so much, Chi. I think you are absolutely right. In terms of grant, most of the time it has been already pre-allocated, and but technical assistance attached to those certain investment funds. I think there's still an opportunity to be explored or tapped, but you're absolutely right. Some of the pipeline projects may not necessarily be ready, Graeme. So I don't know, maybe this is something that we need to discuss, or internally Pacific Island Forum needs to discuss. We may be able to provide you with some guidance of certain business model or pipeline projects that are looked for by these investment funds. And then, of course, with that, you can see the gaps, whether that's a gap within the areas of how the numbers of smallholders, the impacts, livelihood, the impacts on protection or conservations, or some of the elements that are not yet there that need to be supported by, let's say, a small or medium type of grant, including like I mentioned, land legality, farmers organization, PPI compact. That kind of agreement or regulatory framework that is not yet there. So yeah, we are certainly keen to discuss or explore. But like Chi said, and there's element of needed blended finance to start that kind of investment, in different areas, maybe also in Pacific Islands.
Sure. Look, and I think that's something we can discuss a little later in regards to, I guess, a bit more engagement in some of the things we have been working on, and also getting some of the people in key people in the agricultural sector involved in the conversation to help, get the things in place that need to be in place to get you guys into the Pacific, where we'll be here to help. The Pacific Islands Forum and Secretariat, and also Pacific Trade Invest New Zealand are on standby, and we'll talk to you after the webinars, I guess, to talk about a pathway forward. And I've just noticed, talking about Pacific Trade Invest New Zealand, we have our Trade Commissioner, Glenys, has her hand up. Glenys, you've got something to say?
I've always got something to say, Graeme. I thought it would be useful at this juncture to kind of bring the Pacific landscape into focus here, after hearing of the wonderful examples that IDH has been working on or involved in across Southeast Asia. In the Pacific, you have a wide and varied economies across the 16 Pacific Island countries, where only a small number of them are agri-based, while the large number of them are atolls with very little or next to no agri-base. So there, straight off the bat, you have a mixture of two types of economies and landscapes. The second one is within those Pacific Island countries that have an agriculture-based industry or sector, the current commodities kind of align to what you're already working on in Southeast Asia, so plus more. So you've got your coffee and cocoa, you've got your vanillas, and then you've got your sugarcane, coconut, rice, for example, and some of those other ones, right? Then so those are for, that's not counting the other subsistence farming products or produce that's grown all year round, staple food. Where you have the Pacific Island countries that are atoll-based, obviously fisheries is their largest resource. So therein lies a different dynamic. So I just put that out there for IDH's consideration to know when you're talking about the Pacific, this is what we're talking about, And the third part of the Pacific is we're dealing with, or you have on hand, small island economies with population bases of around 1,100 to 1,200 in the small island states, to the larger land-based countries like Papua New Guinea with 5, 6, 7 million and more. So all of that in between is a scale of the types of economies and landscapes that we have in the Pacific. So I think what I'm saying is that for For the Pacific, I think the model for the Pacific would be quite different to what you're currently dealing with in other parts of Southeast Asia. So I would offer that, and I do very much thank and appreciate IDH coming to this forum to engage for the first time with the Pacific, and I thank George for making those initial introductions for Pacific Trade Invest New Zealand. And the other part about the Pacific is we're in three main regions. So that's another model that you could look at, rather than looking at, you can look at it from a national level, where you take, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, whichever, or you could approach it sub-regional level. So you've got a collection of countries in a sub-region of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. That would give you scale, right? Then there's the element of COVID. So in all of what you've presented, how some consideration needs to be given to the impacts of COVID, which is more acute in the Pacific Island countries and elsewhere in the rest of the world. So that's another element that needs, I think, come into play in our thinking of this framework that we talk about. The other one is about the markets. So because of the smallness of our region, our isolation from markets is one of our biggest challenges. And we all know that. That's written in just about every study you pick up and read, right? Our vulnerability to climatic and all sorts of challenges, financial crisis, whatever comes is experienced in the global scene, affects us like all other economies across the world. But COVID in particular, I think that needs to be given some acute considerations, right? When we're working in these COVID times where borders are closed, how do we get these modalities up and running and written within COVID? COVID's not going to go away. Our borders have remained closed since COVID hit the globe and will continue to be closed. All Pacific Island governments are having those conversations, except for one or two are talking about opening their borders soon. So when we talk about markets, it's the Pacific region's distance from markets is our biggest challenge. But if it is the market that dictates or determines the supply side, then note that our Pacific Island countries are small, medium, and large, and that market demand or meeting market, the supply to meet that demand must be matched in such a way that one doesn't outfit the other and breaks down, So when you take the small island states, and there's 7 of them in our region, and amongst those 7, again, there's a combination of land-based and sea-based. So I think markets, some consideration around markets could be given to closer markets to our region, Australia, New Zealand. Although having said that, some of our very successful agribusinesses in our region, New Zealand and Australia is not their main market. It's the US, it's China, right? So I just put it out there that when we're talking about market and based on IDH's model of markets, don't just assume that the large markets of the UK, US, etc., is a nice fit for the Pacific. It's not. So some consideration around that supply demand and whether the market demand of those commodities is the best model for the Pacific. Maybe, maybe not. Just put it out there. That's all from me, Graeme. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenys. Any comments, Fitilian or Chi, to that?
Yeah, I think thank you so much, Glenys. I think those are the types of information and knowledge that we have to know. We would like to know, because we also do not want to go to particular countries or landscapes with our own assumption. I mean, we did it, of course, in the past, like you just mentioned correctly, and we also learned from our failures. So we need to learn from certainly from the characteristics, the context from the Pacific Islands. And you are right. I mean, I used to briefly used to work when I was young in Fiji, long time ago, and I could understand. I mean, the proximity or very far distance from the rest of the world. So that's something that I also did realize when we, Chief, you remember when we went to West and Papua provinces in 2018. It was also challenging, Glenis, because even it is part of the entire big nation, it is still far away from the rest of the country. And then getting coffee or cocoa or fish even from one particular area to even the port, the nearest port, is just painstaking. And then because of that, the price has been adjusted to a certain level that no buyers would commit to buy because it's just too expensive. But we learn also so much that there is variety of buyers, and we need to start from somewhere. And you're absolutely right. We can't just assume that all buyers will act the same and treat Pacific Islands or certain countries like this similarly. So we also need to be intelligent. I mean, from the demand side, in which understanding which buyers are willing to find ways to get impacts much more than only like volumes and so much. And now with the connections of digitalizations, I think we have learned that there's certain opportunities that have been opened to certain markets. But again, this needs to be explored, and that kind of information from those market players need also to be understood by producers in the Pacific Islands. And I think with that kind of understanding and discussion and match, we can start from somewhere. And you're right. I mean, we are also now, Chi can explain further that we are developing these new emerging markets, Chi, in the East Asia. I mean, countries including China. They're big. They're the factory of the world, and they're having so much interest in competing, I think, also with Taiwan in the Pacific, regardless of whether that's political sensitive or not. But I think the East Asian countries, China, the Chinese Taipei, Japan, and Korea, they're looking for also options. They're quite close, and I think the Pacific Island nations are part of their, let's say, future strategy. But of course, we need to treat this carefully. And the US, yes, you're right as well. I think because it's also part of the history or something related to that. And I've been discussing, but this is in the context of Papua, with certain spices company in the US they're also like small and niche. They're looking also for options. And I think last year before COVID, they were even willing to put some investment in terms of packaging those certain spices into small type of jars, and then this can be exported quite easily to the US, and those US wholesale partners, they don't have to package those things again, and that can reduce the costs. And of course, it will be much expensive in the US because the narratives that they sell is not only about the quality, but also the indigenous people, the climate, and so on and so forth. I don't know whether this can be part of the explorations, but I think from now we just have to explore. And I mean, from IDH, we are more than willing to learn, and understand this information further. Maybe Chi, please.
Yes, thank you, Christian, and thanks, Glenis, for your practical points that you already mentioned. And I think that those are quite valuable for all of us to really think how the adaptive strategy should be. So I just want to add one more thing, is that IDH is an innovative organization. So we are small in terms of scale. We just have like 200 staff globally to support for us in the different commodities and landscape program. But the way that we work is that we will really design the tailor-made solutions for the different areas based on the framework that we already created at the global level. So just take only one example, and I think that Christian already mentioned that from the beginning of IDH in 2018, our focus market is EU and US market. So we focus mostly on those markets because IDH is based in EU, and we receive the initial support from EU governments. So that is where we focus firstly on these markets. But when we expand into the further products, and especially in these two, over the last 3 years, we already move our market strategy towards more regional and domestic markets, right? We talk about like the regional markets such as India, China, Indonesia, the big hubs, and in Africa, that is Nigeria, for example. So we move from global market, EU, US market, towards more regional market. And we also move towards domestic market as well, and inter-regional markets, as you mentioned. So I think that is a shift from IDH already. We do not like stick to that from the beginning, and then we just say that anyone wants to work with us, you have to work with the EU players. It is not designed like that. So, and we are small, we are adaptive, and we are flexible, but we also based on the framework that's set up by our global direction and guidance in order to provide the tailor-made solution based on that framework.
Yeah, that's good. Talking about the EU market, from the Pacific Island countries, there's only 2 or 3 Pacific Island countries who export to EU, and the only exportable commodity that's allowed into the EU from the Pacific is, of course, fisheries under the EPA. So so there's different aspects to all of this. So my final point is this, and I guess it's a question. So my question to IDH is the starting point for an engagement with the Pacific, is the starting point an agreed framework? Is it, and if yes, is that agreed framework applicable to national, sub-regional, or the whole Pacific? I just put that out there. And number 2 is the starting point, the timelines. I'm interested in the timelines here. Based on your experience, when you're moving into working with a country starting from ground zero, how long does it take IDH, with all of its partners and technical assistance, to get that country to a point where they can enter into a, what did you call it, PPI, compact arrangement? So I think that would be some information or answers around that might be useful for those tuned in this afternoon. Because I mean, we can talk examples, and we can talk case studies, and we can talk practicalities, but when we're talking, but to kind of bring all of this down into an arrowhead, let's just start thinking about what, so practically speaking, what are the timelines we're talking about here? Based on your experience, is it, wrapping this starting point within a 12-month period? And because in the Pacific, there are cooperatives, there are collectives, all of those, I guess, structures are already in place. It's just a matter of strengthening them and bringing your governance, your governance requirements and procedures aligned. So I think a timeline question is probably an interesting one at this point. Yeah, and of course, behind all of this, Graeme and Pete and I, New Zealand, will stay in touch with yourself in George and IDH. Thank you.
Thank you, Glynis. Maybe I can start. It depends so much on the readiness or the baseline of certain landscapes or districts or jurisdictions, in my view. Some districts or regions that have already, like you mentioned, some sort of capacity, good prototyping and the like. It could be as fast as 2 to 3 years in terms of getting the framework of Green Growth Plan, PPI Compact. And in the meantime, while doing so, we are also focusing on some field level project prototyping, because we also want to have concrete explorations, concrete interventions, because in many ways, some farmers, they have this kind of mindset of seeing is believing. So rather than only talking and discussing and supporting the framework development, for instance, we are also testing with key commodity partners or corporate partners to co-fund or co-invest in those field level projects. That some of the examples that I mentioned, in fact, even while waiting for the PPI Compact, some certain small to medium scale of investment can come. So more or less 2 to 3 years, but in some maybe much more challenging areas or jurisdictions, it could be much more than 2 or 3 years. I think you're right again, absolutely, that if you got already cooperatives, collectives, maybe the best thing to do is understanding what what the gaps they are facing, or the issues they are facing, and then what sort of aggregations that we are talking about, and then the boundary to support the scalability of investment coming in to that area. I think baseline would be key to understand how long and how large that we have to focus in attracting investment, and with whichever timeline that we can see is become much more fruitful. Chi, over to you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Vision. I think that it is a very good answer already. Just get back to the first question of Glennis on the agreement framework. In IDH, we have quite an flexible models of cooperation with the different donors or organizations. We also have like the government to government programs, such as between the Dutch government and Nigerian government, Indian or Malaysian and Indonesian government, under what we call the NISCOPS program, that is for the palm oil program, and that is the cross countries program in that. So it comes from the Asia to Africa, and also linking with the EU markets there. So that is also one option. The other option is that, for example, P4G, they provided us the support for only India and only one landscape there. That is also one possibility. And the other responsibilities is, for example, NICFI, that is the Norway government. They supported us the program across the different countries, Liberia, Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia. So therefore, we are very flexible on what type of agreement that we can do together, as long as those countries or sub-regions share the same interests and share the same fields of working together, like the palm oil countries, they go together and do that, or the countries who is interested in protect the forest can go together into one framework. Other countries who would like to work towards more sustainable landscape with the markets for the key commodities, they can also put them together in 7 landscape at this moment under the Dutch government support. So I have to say that it is a very, very flexible, as long as we need to really discuss and to have a good scoping, so that we can make the decision of what level or scope that we think that is feasible for us to put in together as the agreement. And get back to your second question on the timeline. I think Vision put it 2 or 3 years, but I think that this is not the very new landscape for us anymore, because we already operated in others as well. Of course, the situation is different from here and there, but I just say, let's take one example of India. We just recently started with one program in Madhya Pradesh state in India, and we take 6 months for scoping, because the scoping is quite critical for us to really understand and really put where the PPI compact should be as the first pilot. Right? We take it 6 months for scoping, and then we take another 6 months in order to start the operation of the program. And then the maximum is 1 year later, we have the first PPI compact signed. Yeah. So the total of scoping is until the first PPI compact signed is about 1.5 years. So that is really
good. That's good. I think you'll have a number of Pacific Island countries, and we've got the PS Agriculture Fiji on the line.
Yeah.
You have a few Pacific Island countries who would be ready now to engage with you, because they already have national agriculture policies to support foreign FDI, and they have sector policies, they have signed international trade agreements. So you will have in the Pacific, a few Pacific Island countries ready to engage with you, I think, very, very quickly. Yeah, so that's look, Graeme, I really have to take my leave. I've got another meeting to jump onto, so just let me say my thanks really to IDH. Graeme, you can carry on facilitating the remainder of the program. But I do want to say on behalf of Pacific Trade Invest New Zealand that we're very, I think, all the more rich hearing from you this afternoon, and I look forward to future collaboration with yourself and through George Atamuri. So thank you. Thank you for joining us, Naka.
Thanks a lot, Glynis.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glynis. Look, I think we might wrap up on that. We've had a lot of good discussions, a lot of questions and answers, which I think is always the most fruitful part of the discussion with people.
Graeme,
exchange.
if I may,
Oh,
can I ask one very quick question?
Sure, George. Absolutely.
Right. Now, my understanding is that there are some landscapes in the Pacific, such as coffee and cocoa, that already could link with an existing IDH program. Is this something we could focus on as sort of low-hanging fruit to like commence an engagement with IDH in the Pacific? Yeah, that's the question.
Thanks, George. This is quite an interesting question. And yes, you are right that we need to have like the low-hanging fruit as a starting point in order to really test our theory in the new landscapes. So you are right that at the global level, we have one business unit called agro commodities, and they are taking care of cocoa, coffee, and tea. So those are like the key commodities there. And in Asia, we are also having the programs on tea and on cocoa and on coffee as well, and also on spices. So those are like the key commodity as vanilla as well, but vanilla is not much in Asia at this moment. So I think that can be like the first starting points for us to really identify that the coffee, cocoa, landscape based can be like the first PPI compact, let's say, because we at the global level and at the regional level, we already have the contact points, the markets, the companies that are buying coffee and cocoa already understand the methodology and the approach that IDH is now applying globally. So it's much easier in order to bring them on board as the starting point and really going from there to expand it to other commodities later. But as long as they are in one landscape, and then we will have to make sure that that is like a sustainable landscape as a whole. It cannot be just only one or two commodity there, because we cannot leave the other farmers outside of our scope of sustainable landscapes. That is not like the concept of jurisdictional approach.
Okay, that's very good to know. Thank you. Yeah.
You are welcome.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Chi. Look, I think 2.5 hours. We've gone about 25 minutes over, which is always a good sign that it's been a great webinar. So I'd like to just say my thanks again to Director Khan, Permanent Secretary Das, George, Kuru, can I call you Director George, I guess we'll say, Director Chi, Director Fitzian, thank you so much for sharing all of your valuable experience with us, and certainly if we could share the presentations that you gave today with the audience too, that'd be much appreciated. And there will be on YouTube, and we're not trying to start up a YouTube blog or anything here, but we will have this webinar on YouTube for anyone to go and to access and to share with anybody that couldn't make it to the webinar. And I guess in the Pacific Islands, it isn't always possible to have good video data. So certainly we want to make sure that everyone can access this webinar. I think I'll certainly be watching it again. I'm in lockdown, so it'll certainly be good entertainment for me. But thank you again to everyone for taking your valuable time to hear us out today. And we certainly, as PDI New Zealand, and also I guess the Fijian government and all the governments in the Pacific, we will continue to work with IDH and Atamuri to progress this engagement. And I think there are a few things that we can start talking about very soon. And certainly we'll be talking to the governments and all the private sector people that have opportunities to start to really understand more about what we can do in the short to medium term, because I guess post-COVID recovery is important, and we want to get things, I guess, balanced up, and certainly agriculture sectors where we can see that balance coming from in regards to, I guess, not relying so much on tourism in the Pacific, which is still very important, but we need to boost up other sectors. So when something like COVID happens, you know, the impact isn't as strong. So please contact us, anyone, if you have any questions, or you want to be connected to anyone, please contact us. And once again, thank you everyone for your time today. And I wish you a great week, and be safe, and we'll talk to you all again one day soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graeme. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.